And the Ewing family saga continues tomorrow afternoon at the same time, 3 o'clock. Later this afternoon at 4:35, a 40 minutes documentary joins 2,000 freshers as they're about to enter Liverpool University, a particularly taxing time for Gillian Wake, who's blind. Before that, here on 2, the first of 2 portraits of wildlife on a farm in Devon, in the natural world.
"1,500 years ago, this country was densely covered in woods. Today, our forests are a skeleton of their former selves. The bulk of Britain has been opened up for farming. Farmland is by now the largest natural home for wildlife we have left. But a wildlife habitat is generally what a farm strives not to be. Much of our wildlife has adapted to a landscape slowly changing over thousands of years. But can it cope with the modern farm, where the landscape alters drastically season by season, even week by week? On this farm, in the South Hams of Devon, there's an intricate mesh between the farmer and his wild competitors, his secret harvesters. A jackdaw and a sheep, wild bird, domestic animal. The plough, drawing behind it a following of gulls. There are moments of give and take. A rat and a barn. And far away from woods, or even from a hedge, a wood mouse living right in the middle of a field, adapted to the field. To the wood mouse, this is an earthquake. To the beetles and bugs, the millipedes and grubs, and even the earthworms of the soil, it's catastrophe. To a farmer, it's the oldest way of controlling the weeds and pests of his field. The plough, wreaking havoc in the earth. It chops and smashes pests. Some are buried too deep to survive, while others are dragged to the surface and exposed to the drying wind and the hunger of the gulls. A wood mouse darts to avoid its predators, leaping and bounding like a kangaroo. This is a sight one can see on any farm in Britain. The plough trailing its wedding veil of gulls. But it's an uneasy marriage.
On the farm today, with the modern machinery, wildlife haven't got such a good time as what they did years and years ago. everything is speeded up. Where the man used to go out and plough with a horse and plough, well, he might plough an acre a day if he was lucky, but a man today can go out with a tractor and plough 20 acres in a day.
The field is already finished, and at once seed is going in. It's early autumn. So speeded up is the modern farm that much of the sowing no longer waits until spring. The farming year starts now. For wildlife, farmland is a chancy place to live, subject to both disaster and glut. This time, it's glut. Jays and some wood pigeons plunder the new sown grain. Wood pigeons now depend on the farmer to keep up their massive numbers. Members of the crow family arrive. Jackdaws, familiar profiteers of farmland. And a young rook. Even by night, the pillage on the new sown field goes on. The wood mouse, quite recovered now from the earthquake of the plough, locates buried seeds by its sense of smell. Fortunately, the mice cause little damage to the final harvest, and they do eat a significant number of pests and weed seeds as well. Night after night, they'll dig up the grain, laying in huge winter stores, hidden in burrows or nearby hedges. At this time of year, the hedges are rich with food for wildlife. A comma butterfly feeds on blackberries. Soon, it will fold up its ragged, dead leaf-seeming wings and hibernate amongst wintry foliage. Juices oozing from the ripe fruit provide a nourishing meal. But there's more fruit and seed than just blackberries in the hedgerow now. Even this mobile curiosity is a seed, the notorious wild oat. Its jointed spikelets contract and twitch. Speeding up the action reveals just how it walks before it starts to twist its way into the ground. Wild oats are a scourge for the farmer, but each seed is a rich mouthful for foraging birds and animals. On farmland, new catastrophes for nature come thick and fast. The farmer, like anyone else, can see that it's a shame to cut back a hedge so rich in berries. But the hedges do have to be cut now, before the ground gets too wet to bring the tractor out. This flail cutter tears and shreds the branches, taking almost every young sapling with it. Gone in a few hours are not only the trees of the future, but saplings which could have been necessary songposts for some of next year's nesting birds.
If you can do it early in the autumn, you can make a cleaner, tidier job. That field is my factory floor. I got to get as much as I can out of that field to pay me bills like everybody else.
No more the sprawling hedgerows dotted with trees. A neighbouring farmer uses a trimmer instead of a flail. Much more manageable, it can readily be steered to avoid saplings if the farmer chooses. Even so, he is just as bound by timing as his neighbour. a sumptuous supply of wild food for the winter vanishes. But what the farmer takes with one hand, he may unknowingly give back with the other. A wealth of food and shelter can be found here, in a field of kale. Cabbage white butterflies are obvious exploiters. These eggs of the large white have little chance of hatching out now that the year is getting late. But the adults are still active. A long late summer has given them a chance for 3 broods. Their caterpillars will soon pupate near the food supply to spend the winter dormant. Until then, they eat their fill at the farmer's expense. It may be small consolation to the farmer, but as many as 7 out of 10 of these juicy caterpillars are parasitized, literally eaten alive by other insects. Another 2 out of 10 will be picked off by birds. Over the edge of the kale field, a buzzard patrols for small mammals. And there's a lot more to this field than buzzards and cabbage whites and kale. There are weeds. Most fields are clean of weeds these days, but kale is cattle food. And in this case, chemical weed killers have not been used. Weed seeds are the staple diet of most of our finches. To this finch, a linnet, the field is a precious larder in a weed-free countryside. As autumn creeps on, the kale will provide for an abundance of wildlife beneath its leafy canopy. Here, in a mini forest, predator seeks prey. Prey seeks shelter. Day by day, the cattle will be fed their portion of kale until the bad weather drives the farmer to bring them in. October rains drench the pastures and the deeper soil. A worm surfaces from the sodden earth. A centipede climbs to avoid drowning. But now, each is vulnerable to a hungry blackbird. Victims of the deluge attract some of the most successful birds of our farmland. Rooks, for instance. Also on the lookout, the opportunist jackdaw. And starlings, profiteers in the fields. These birds are the lucky ones. Yet even they depend on what remains of Britain's woodlands, as well as on the farmer and his land. By November, it's too wet to take the tractor on the fields. Now the farmer can be thankful he cut those hedges when he did. As the rain persists, the burrows of small animals may be flooded out. In conditions like these, there's no place like home. For the rat, whether out in the fields or near in, home is where man is. This comfortable barn already has a resident community. Like the rat, the cockroach is a commensal with us, an eater at our table. Grain weevils and flower beetles are here too, ruining the stored seed. Such secret harvesters give nature a bad name on any farm. Now the mornings have turned bitterly cold. The ground iron hard. Frost breaks up the soil and allows air in, slowly preparing an ideal crumbly till for the spring-sown seed. For animals out of doors, whether domestic or wild, frost means hunger, unless there's help. Whether they mean to or not, farmers sustain wildlife. An open gate to the feed shed in the field is enough invitation for a robin. He's not after the feed. He's much more interested in the insects living on it. An unexpected visitor. The jay's buried store of acorns must be frozen over.
When we really get a hard frost, it is marvellous how the young birds and animals do survive. And when we take the corn out to feed the sheep, the young birds seem to know when they come around the troughs and clear up the little scraps that the sheep leave. They seem quite contented.
The farmer can't be expected to allow his hedges to grow into woods just for the sake of the blue tit, or to nurture weedy fields for the sake of the chaffinch. Yet, leftovers like these can mean the difference between life and death for many small birds. And after all, they don't cost the farmer very much.
Sometimes it's marvellous how they do survive.
The starlings, no longer able to probe the frozen ground for grubs and pests, barge their way in. They're cheeky, noisy, and much maligned, but splendid in their winter plumage. gentle Devonshire midwinter. Out of doors, the living world holds its icy breath. But in the snug warmth of the cattle shed, the harsh cold is forgotten. Indoors, rats and men are sheltered from the extremes of the seasons. And freed from these constraints, rats, like us, can breed at any time of the year. Destroyer of crops, spoiler of food, carrier of disease, the rat is no friend. The farmer's answer is poison, but carefully laid so that other animals don't take it. In the lee of the cowshed, some green leaves have survived the cold to provide the final snack. Dealing death to the rat is just another job to the farmer. So is carrying out muck to the fields. But nothing done on the farm is without its consequences for wildlife. A nest of baby earwigs has been disturbed.
Wind is cold in the winter and we're on cleaning out farmyard manure. It's marvellous how the bigger birds, the rooks and the crows and the jackdaws, know. The birds do seem to know exactly what I'm doing on the farm, and then 2 or 3 days later you'll see them up in the field turning over every individual lump of farmyard manure to get any odd worm or insect that's kind of found a home in this lump.
The rook, like all members of the crow family, learns more quickly than most other birds. Evolution equipped it with a long bill, ideally suited for probing. More recently in its history, when man took to farming, the rook learned a new, high degree of specialization for feeding on farmland. These birds do seem clever, and they are. The first sign, the first sound of the turn of the year. The return to the rookery. Last year's nest has to be pulled apart and rebuilt by the returning pair. Its reconstruction will be just as untidy as the last one. For the jackdaw, making a living is still very hard, but the odd sheep tick makes a tasty snack. Most wild animals find it a hungry time of year. Even the majestic buzzard is obliged to fill up on worms. But there is an air of anticipation on the farm. The first ewes are coming into labor. Of magpies, it's said, 1 for sorrow, 2 for mirth, 3 for a wedding, 4 a birth. Before the lamb has even struggled to its feet, carrion crows come in and clear up. The magpie waits around the lambing ewes hungrily. Perhaps the early bird will get the afterbirth. The raven, vulture of sheep country, is quick to scavenge a lamb that was stillborn. And still the magpie waits. At less than half the size of a raven, it's not in a position to do much else. At last, after a long wait, the magpie gets its chance. The buzzard's reputation as a lamb killer is undeserved. It still pecks the ground for worms and scraps. The grey weeks of late winter pass. The buds are not yet out on the branches. But up in the rookery, an early brood already clamour for food. A healthy supply of earthworms is now demanded, and the rooks seem to time this very well. Scientists believe that each year rooks synchronize their egg-laying so that the young arrive just when there's an earthworm abundance. How they do this is not understood. For the cock pheasant, the year is still young. It's now, before breeding, that any disputes about territory must be settled. The hen pheasant prospects for a nesting site. Some thick vegetation near the field's edge would be ideal. Many pheasants in Britain are hand-fed, reared as game birds. But on this farm, as on quite a few in Devon, they have to fend for themselves. Another cock pheasant is feeding nearby. Apparently two nearby. No one has yet puzzled out the true reason for these rumbustious springtime conflicts.
I had a double last night and I went out this morning.
For the farmer, there's a more important conflict. He's lost a late-born lamb and called in a trapper to identify and kill the culprit.
Where did the button? Behind or in front? The biters go for the back of everything.
Yeah.
And foxes go for the head. Poultry, calves, sheep, or anything.
Yeah. Well, it's always the same then?
Always the same. You don't find, when you find a sheep that's been eat out from behind, 'tis a biter.
Yeah. Well, I think
Most
it's, in our case, it's more likely to be a fox, really.
Well,
But if you go over and
eh,
take a look and see.
I'll do that. Well, I go as a rule after dinner and till up a farm. And then they stay there until I've caught what's doing the damage. Might be 2 days, might be 5.
Here, there's genuine cause for concern. The farmer has a problem. A snare set for one animal may trap another.
Biters and foxes travel the same runs a lot of the time. But if there's small O's and then going through the edges, you'll catch either one of the things. But even where there's open runs, you get the fox alone.
The snare didn't catch the fox. Clearly an innocent badger was using the same run.
I don't think there's a lot of cruelty in it. Not when it's done by somebody that got some experience.
All right.
Trapping badgers is illegal, But as the snare was intended for a fox, then the law protects the trapper.
All right, all right. Oh. Badgers, they do stand more chance of living than what foxes do. Foxes, as a rule, a lot of them will be dead. But badgers, a lot of they are living.
It's only rarely that a trap for a fox will catch a badger. No farmer likes to catch a badger. What's more, it takes a lot of trouble and danger to set a badger free. These are what the farmer was trying to protect. The lamb's tails have been ringed. A tight rubber band cuts off the blood supply to the tail so that it eventually withers and falls off. Even by ringing his lambs, the farmer offers a little bit back to wildlife. Unfortunately for the scavenging magpie, the early bird doesn't get the tail. Neither does the carrion crow. April ploughing. At last, the food supply is improving. A tremendous number of soil creatures, leather jackets, white grubs, wireworms, and other serious farm pests are taken by the birds. But it's no use pretending that looking after the birds would noticeably boost the farmer's income. Wildlife can often be an asset, but it won't pay its way without a little human help. So again, the tractor brings its train of scavengers. Once more, the ploughing is finished in almost unseemly haste, and the field is being rolled. A juvenile rook still harries its parent for tidbits from that bulging crop. Nearby, the tiny chicks of the long-tailed tit also beg persistently from the protective dome of their nest. Food for these chicks is coming from the farmer's land. But only where there are hedgerow trees and woods can these birds still survive. The springtime hedges are rich in wildlife now. But that in itself is a problem. Hedges house rabbits. Rabbits destroy crops and compete with the livestock, eating into the profits. Gone are our rough meadows with their wild grasses. This grass is a crop, sown and nurtured, and expensive. So rabbits are one of the reasons why many farmers get rid of hedges altogether. And game birds, like the pheasant, are why many hedges are actually preserved. Another springtime activity for the farmer. The ditch must be cleared, or it may flood. Ditch clearing is often a threat to wildlife. But luckily, this pheasant's nest has been missed by the ditcher. Perhaps the pheasant will have this to escape as well. Some weeks later, with a now much deeper ditch to negotiate, the pheasant's chicks emerge. Unlike the fortunate chicks of the long-tailed tit, these youngsters must forage for their insect food from the beginning. Their superb camouflage is vital for survival. But so too is the shelter of the hedge and its profusion of plant and insect life. Across a denuded countryside, hedges lie like veins and arteries connecting the precious woods. It's fortunate that on this farm there are several acres of woodland, a crucial haven for wildlife. But generally, the wood, even the small copse, is becoming more and more scarce. The bluebell provides a feast for the destructive cabbage whites. And other plants, some of them in hedges, many in rough country, play host to these enemies of farmland. At this time of year, cereal aphids multiply at a tremendous rate. 2 or 3 generations can easily be seen together. In this system of asexual, rapid, live birth, each aphid is born with its own babies already inside it. In this way, the aphids ensure that maximum possible numbers will descend on the crop in summer. Luckily for the farmer, not everything that's running wild on his farm is also destructive. brown hares are true creatures of the field. If Britain were once again forested, the hares would have no home. On the short grass of pastures, they feed, breed, and all summer long they play. We call it March hare madness, but it can begin in February and still be seen in September. Spraying, chasing, and boxing are all part of the courtship behavior for which the hare is famous. In most places, hares are not much of a pest, and it's sad to think that over the past 20 years their numbers in Britain have dwindled. Partly this may be due to the practice of grazing more animals per acre, and partly to an increase in foxes and other predators. The individual farmer may mean them no harm at all.
I've stopped and watched them for 5-10 minutes sometimes, and it's really amusing how they kind of run around, jump around and play.
Man does not live by bread alone. Yet 80% of our land is devoted to just that, the provision of bread and meat. After all, that's what the farm is here for. And maintenance of wildlife has just been an accidental bonus. But is it a bonus we have to lose? Clearly, there's not much wrong with this farm, in spite of the many secret harvesters which have had the fields to themselves all winter. But how will the pressures and conflicts increase as the crops ripen during the summer?
Tomorrow you can see how the secret harvesters plunder the fruits of summer. The Natural World, tomorrow at 3:45.